Is the sound on? Is the sound on? Sound is on. Okay, good morning, Jockalites. Welcome back to a wonderful edition of the Mr. Cool Mug podcast. Have you been watching sports recently? Because I like sports. I watch sports. Some people are not familiar with sports. Some people don't keep up with sports. I think those people are losers. I personally belong to a group of people who we like talking about sports. Which sports? What sports? What is sports? Some people don't know. Sports, for those people who don't know, sports is just basically groups of violent men attacking one another. There are certain rules, right? There are certain things you can and can't do, but pretty much it's just about violent, masculine, testosterone warriors going at it. And there's winners and there's losers, but that's sports. And we all like watching sports. Even if we have never ourselves played sports, we like to hear about sports. We like to talk about sports, which teams are doing well, which teams are, going up and down and all that kinds of things. And there's a lot of trading and going on. There's like alliances and whatever. So recently there's been this match between the Kurds and the Turks. And it's been pretty exciting, all of the things going on in the background. At first you hear about this match and you think, this isn't really going to happen. You're kind of doubtful because the whole match was predicated. There was like this whole stadium set up where it was going to be the United States there, and it was going to be USA versus Assad, USA versus Russia, USA versus Iran, right? There were all these matches that were supposed to go on, but USA decides to drop out of the game, drop out of the championship, and all of a sudden now the substitute is Turkey, and Turkey walks in, and Turkey starts this match with the Kurds. Now, previously, Kurds and the United States were on the same side. They were kind of tag teaming. But the United States withdraws, and the Kurds are just getting smashed by these Turks. So it's a development. It's a development. A lot of people are mad about this because, especially a lot of people rooting for America, they kind of hoped that America and the Kurds, excuse me, I'm mixing up the Turks with the Kurds here, and it produces some unfortunate mistakes, some unfortunate, what are they called, spoonerisms, if you will. But I don't mean to do that. That is accidental. There's nothing Freudian about that. Purely, we are talking about Kurds and Turks, not Kirks or anything like that. These two teams, by the way, they go back a long way. And the whole, to sort of blow things up for you, to really bring it into perspective, we have to understand that Bashar al-Assad is a proxy for the Russians. In the same way that North Korea is a proxy for the Chinese, Assad is a proxy for the Russians. America obviously doesn't like Russia. America and Russia, they're going at it. So America is attacking Assad, but America doesn't just invade Syria. No, America supports ISIS. America supports Al-Qaeda. America supports the rebels, who are just various shades of Islamic extremists and terrorists. And they support the Kurds. And so the Kurds in America, they're tight for this reason. The Kurds are essentially an American-Israeli proxy. The Kurds, as a people, by the way, if you poll the nations of the Middle East, you poll the Pakistanis, the Iranians, the Afghanis, the Iraqis, the Saudis, if you poll the Moroccans, if you poll the, who am I missing? The guys down in Yemen, the Libyans, the Tunisians, the Moroccans, pretty much anyone in the Muslim world, if you poll the populace, not the government, but if you ask the populace, are you a friend of Israel or are you a foe? Even Jordan. Jordan as a country, officially the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. The Hashemites who rule over Jordan, they are officially in a treaty with Israel to not attack Israel. So the government of Jordan is actually a friend of Israel. Similarly, the government of Egypt is actually quite friendly with Israel. There are a lot of governments in the Middle East that are in some way or another tacitly allied or have some kind of tie or some kind of treaty either with Israel or with America. And America and Israel are kind of one and the same in the Middle East. So the governments might be on the side of Israel. Saudi Arabia is another good example. But the populace usually says, we don't like Israel for reasons of Zionism, and we can go into that. But anyway, they don't like him. The Kurds are the one nation, the one ethnicity in the Middle East that actually likes Israel. Even the Christians in the Middle East don't like Israel, which is a big shocker. Even the atheists, even the secularists, even the Zoroastrians, you can get down in the weeds with it. Really, no one likes Israel, and there's only one population that I've found, and maybe I'm wrong, point them out to me if I'm wrong, but it's only the Kurds who are going to go out waving Israeli flags. So they're a pretty unique people, and right now they're getting crushed by the Turks. And this is very interesting because if we understand the Kurds are a proxy of the United States and Israel, if we understand Assad is a proxy of Russia, then who are the Turks? Well, the Turks, interestingly enough, are part of NATO. Now, why are the Turks part of NATO? Well, it was part of the Cold War, right, to encircle the Soviet Union, to prevent the expansion of the Soviet Union. You had NATO. You had NATO, which said if anyone attacks any of these countries, we're all going to come together as a collective united force, and we're essentially going to crush the Soviet Union. That was the idea of NATO. It was in opposition to the Warsaw Pact. Now, NATO, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO is not really so important anymore. It does still serve as a kind of an anti-Russian force. But Turkey joined NATO because Turkey wanted to become closer to the West. And eventually, Turkey wanted to become part of the European Union. And that was a huge part of the reason and a huge part of the strategy on the part of the Turks was, as we join NATO, going to open ourselves up to closer integration with Europe, which began purely as economic integration, and now today we see as political integration. They eventually want to join the EU. Now, time and time again, they've been rejected from the European Union. And this, as a Turk, is pretty infuriating because you've done all this stuff. You've housed nuclear weapons for America on behalf of NATO. You've done all of this stuff on behalf of the Atlanticist powers. And what have you got for it, by the way? You have America is funding the Kurds, who are the biggest terrorists against the Turkish government. The Turkish government has one big security threat, which is these Kurdish separatists in the south and the, I guess that would be the east of the country, the southeast of their country. You have these Kurdish terrorists who are blowing up things in the capital city, and they're causing all kinds of problems. So you're looking at America, you're like, America, we joined NATO to be friendly with you. We joined NATO to join the European Union. We've been rejected from the EU. On what grounds, by the way? On what grounds? That Turkey is culturally incompatible or something? Well, what about all these Syrian refugees? What about all these Africans who are just pouring across the border? Are they not culturally incompatible? Or is their human rights record good? When they come in and they commit sexual assaults and they create no-go zones and they do what they do what we've seen them do. Is that good human rights? Is that a good show of a liberal democratic attitude, a liberal democratic value? So Turkey sees this, and Turkey is just sort of fed up with this. It's like, we tried to be nice with you, we tried to help you out, we tried to be part of your thing, but you rejected us, you used us, you abused us, you wrung us out like a sponge, and then you kicked us down the gutter and left us to die. And we're being attacked by these Kurdish terrorists, and you're funding the Kurdish terrorists, so we're sort of fed up at this point. This is the situation that Turkey finds itself in. And Turkey has a very poor relationship with Russia. We all remember the Crimean War. We all remember it was a bad time. It was a bad time for Turkey. It was a bad time for the Ottoman Empire. Turkey and Russia, traditional enemies. It goes back a long way. Everyone knows about Turkey and Russia. Yet, Turkey has been treated so badly by the West, by America, by Europe, that Turkey has made a very rapid transition. Even just a few years ago, Turkey actually shot down a Russian plane. This was maybe this was even 2018, but I think it was 2017, if not earlier. But this was a very short time ago that Turkey was shooting down Russian planes, which is an act of war. It's an act of war. It was on the border between, it was like a mile away from the Turkish border, flying in northern Syria, and the Turks shot down the plane. They shot it down. So that was, I mean, it looked like, I mean, obviously Russia, it takes a little more than that for two powers, which again, Turkey is part of NATO, Russia obviously not part of NATO. If they go to war, it could potentially be a world war. So obviously, one plane being shot down wasn't enough to provoke a full-scale war, but it was a very low point in Turkish-Russian relations. By the way, if you think that's bad, we've had the Cuban Missile Crisis, we've had other points in history where Russians have shot down commercial airlines. I forget the name of the airline, but one of the important anti-communist was on the airline at the time, and it got shot down. So things of this nature have happened, and they don't necessarily lead to war. But it was a very bad point in Turkish-Russian relations. And from that point, I think that sort of incident brought things to a head where Turkey and Russia sort of looked at each other and they're like, you know what, we could go to war. And let's talk about it. You know what, if you're just going to shoot down my planes, we might as well be honest. We might as well just talk about it. What is your problem, Turkey? And by the way, what are you getting? What are you getting by being part of this NATO alliance? You are getting your own people, your own friends in NATO are funding these Kurdish terrorists. They're funding these Kurdish separatists on your border. The biggest threat to your national security. How is NATO helping you be secure as a country if they're funding these Kurds? And so Russia essentially, I think at this point, goes to Turkey and says, what are you getting out of this? I know you hate us. I know you hate us, but don't you also hate America? Don't you also hate the fact that America is publicly, not even secretly, they'll secretly fund ISIS, they'll secretly fund Al-Qaeda, they'll secretly start the Taliban. But as far as the Kurds, they could not be more brazen with it. They could not be more insulting. And the Turkish public hate America, and the Turkish public hate Israel. They hate this whole thing. So why, Erdogan specifically, you go to Erdogan and you say, Erdogan, what are you getting out of this? You're an authoritarian dictator. What are you getting out of this alliance with America? And they say, look, I know you don't like us, the Russians, but there's two choices. You can be on Team Russia, or you can be on Team America. Now, you know what Team America is doing for you. Team America is backstabbing you. It's helping your biggest enemy. Or you could be on Team Russia. Look how Russia treats its allies. Assad would not be alive today if it were not for Russia. Assad would be dead, just like Muammar Gaddafi, just like Saddam Hussein. He would be dead, but he's not. And the only reason why is Russian aid and support. Now, Russia didn't have to do that. Russia could have left him high and dry if they wanted to. Surely, Russian expenditure on Syria is much, much greater than anything Russia has ever gotten out of Syria. They maybe have a few air bases, a few naval bases. Honestly, strategically, the importance of keeping Syria as a proxy state for Russia is not big on Russia's list of necessities and things that they really need right here and right now. Russia has a huge economic problem, as Kurt has pointed out, our good friend Mr. Doolittle. Dr. Doolittle, that's doctor to you, he has a PhD. Dr. Doolittle has said, look, Russia has one asset. That is the energy sector. That is natural gas, that is petroleum, that is oil reserves. That is all Russia has. Russia has nothing else. It does not have a technology sector. Russia does not have a services sector. It does not have cheap labor. Russia cannot compete with India in terms of cheap labor. It cannot compete with China. It cannot compete with Southeast Asia like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, however you say that. Cannot compete with the broader third world in terms of providing cheap labor. You know, the citizens of Russia, they are not as numerous. First of all, it's only a country of 140 million people. They don't have anywhere near 1 billion people. They don't have the cheap labor. They don't have the high-skilled workers. They don't have a technology sector. They have a big military sector, which we can get into, but they're not making IBM computers. They're not making cars. Who has ever bought a Russian car? When we think of cars, we think of maybe the American-made cars like the Ford, and I guess that's it at this point. But we think of Japanese cars. Even Chinese cars are coming onto the market. But we think maybe of German cars, Italian cars, some British cars. we think of some certain European cars. Never once do we think about a Russian car. So Russians, they don't have manufacturing. That's bad. They don't have tech. They don't have a Silicon Valley. They're not producing. Japan produces electronics. China produces electronics. Europe produces some high-tech goods. America has Silicon Valley, produces high-tech goods. Russia doesn't have any high-tech goods. It doesn't have manufacturing. It doesn't have cheap labor. It doesn't really have anything going for it economically except for energy, petroleum, natural gas, these things. This is pretty much all Russia has. That's it. And at the end of the day, if the economy shifts at all in terms of energy, if we move more towards solar, if we move more toward nuclear, which is a huge opportunity, which you have to wonder why we're not exploiting that. Perhaps it's because of the lobbying efforts of certain billionaire transnational corporations want to keep us hooked on oil. But there are alternatives. Nuclear is a legitimate alternative. Now you can say, oh, well, 5 Mile Island and look at Chernobyl and it could just explode and kill everybody. Well, honestly, I don't think anyone cares. Honestly, I don't think anyone cares. I think we drive cars, and I think 20,000 people a year in the United States die every year because of cars. I don't think anybody cares. I think people still drink and drive, and I don't think anybody cares. And I think eventually you're probably going to have the self-driving cars and things of that nature. But I don't think anyone cares. If every once in a while, every 5 years, a nuclear plant blows up and everyone gets radiation, look, we're all fat, we're all stupid, we drink plastic straws, we've got xenoestrogens, we're eating soy, we're eating corn syrup. No one cares. No one cares about a little radiation. So I think nuclear or something, some combination of nuclear or something else is probably going to be the future. Maybe they'll come up with bacterial colonies which produce, or algae colonies which produce petroleum or something like a ethanol is what I'm thinking of. Some kind of an ethanol, some kind of a plant-based production where you just basically fill the Pacific Ocean with giant colonies of bacteria, or algae, I should say, algae colonies that just fill the Pacific Ocean and just create millions of barrels of tons of oil. Just from the sun's rays hit the Pacific Ocean, these algae colonies grow and they just produce oil, and then tankers come along and they extract it. The extraction process is the hardest, and of course the environmental impact is that we kill all the fish and perhaps totally change the climate of the earth and mess it up in a big way. But there are solutions to the energy crisis that are probably bad for the environment, probably going to kill a lot of people, but there are solutions to the energy crisis. What happens then to Russia with its energy reserves? What happens when those reserves, deplete? So Russia has some big problems. Russia really needs to diversify. And the only way Russia can do this is it either has to internally develop its own tech sector, it has to develop its own people in one way or another. That is an option, theoretically. It can try to do something like that, and maybe it is. But on the other hand, Russia could just conquer Germany again. Or maybe less conquer, but create an alliance with Germany, because Germany has the brain power. If you combine German brain power with the Russian military infrastructure, then you have a solid alliance, a solid bloc. This is what the Soviet Union had with East Germany. The East Germans had the highest standard of living of all the communist bloc, and that wasn't something that was entirely necessary, right? Because the Germans had been laid low in the 50s, they were starving in the streets, and then the communists gradually gave them more autonomy, let them develop their little German cars and whatever. And the East Germans perfected communism. If you want to look at the best example of the best communist economy in the world, you have to look at East Germany. Nobody did it better. And so the East Germans were a huge asset to the Soviet Union in terms of providing spy power, in terms of intellectual power, in terms of everything, cultural, whatever, what have you. So that's really what Russia needs. In order to secure its existence as a power, it needs to bring a country like Germany into the fold. And the only way it can really do that is by flexing its best asset, which is its military. So it needs to keep developing its military. It has an outsized military. Russia, I mean, America spends more on military than anybody else, but Russia really gets more bang for the buck because most American military spending is on spying, it's on espionage, it's on helping George Soros, it's on starting riots and revolutions. Most American military spending is on thwarting domestic terrorism and brainwashing the populace and psyops. And most of the American military is not focused on fighting a war in the sense of building tanks and bombs that are really good. Most of American military spending is actually spent on brainwashing the populace, funding feminism. Was it Gloria Steinem, I think? Maybe she's there, or is it Andrea Dworkin? Is it Dworkin or one of these feminists was funded by the State Department? Anyway, so they've got these sort of all of the money essentially goes toward shaping culture and fighting the psychological war. Russia, on the other hand, has to be very frugal, and so it can't just spend billions of dollars on, transgenderism or whatever. Psychological warfare in Russia basically just goes for easy targets like, oh, America is racist, or, America is anti-white, or it basically points out really easy stuff and doesn't try too hard, whereas the American military is like, how can we create like a new species of gender that's never been seen before? So the American military is really going hard in the paint. It's like choosing the hardest battles of how do we completely change the cultural landscape globally all at once in a revolutionary way that's never been seen before. And Russia's like, how about we just point out hypocrisies and inconsistencies and exploit vulnerabilities that already exist? And the rest of the budget actually goes into making tanks and bombs and planes. So if you actually looked at the tanks, bombs, airplanes budget of Russia and America, they're not actually so distant as the overall spending would have you believe. So this is their marginal utility. This is their strength. This is what they're good at. And they should basically stick with it, and they should try to push America out of Europe, and they should try to say to Germany, look, Germany, nobody likes you. You're having a hard time. America's abandoned you. There's some problems. France, England, you've got problems, Germany. I know Germany's currently in the European Union, but we have to understand the European Union is held together to a large extent by American occupying power. We still have military bases in Europe that are keeping this coalition together of the European Union. But if America withdraws, it's a completely different situation. It's completely different in the sense that now Germany is really seen as this oppressive, occupying force that is dominating these other countries, and these other countries are not going to be so happy about it. So America is really the glue that's keeping it together. If Russia can push out America, this whole European Union alliance between countries like France and Germany, or Germany and Great Britain, it's very tenuous. It's very hard to see those countries saying, oh yeah, we're just going to listen to whatever Germany tells us to do, which is pretty much what that's how it's set up, right? So eventually, if America can be pushed out by Russia, Germany can be said, look, Germany, nobody likes you, but we're the Russians, we'll help you. We've worked with you before. It's possible. Why don't we make a thing? And then you've got the German brain power, you've got the Russian military, and you have something that can work. Germany on its own, isolated, not really going to work. The Russians on their own, big problems there. But Germany, Russia together, they can make something work. So that is Russia's big idea, is how can we exhaust the American military? How can we create problems for America to fuel isolationism so that America withdraws, Russia can move into Europe, make friends with Germany, and have a solid power block. That is the Russian objective. It's reasonable. It could happen. Time will tell. Obviously, it's not going to happen overnight, but things like the Iraq War, things like the Syrian Civil War, these are testing grounds where the Russians are really just trying to exhaust the Americans, create problems for America at home and abroad. So Trump is withdrawing for his own. I don't really know. This was kind of a surprise to me. I didn't actually believe it when it said, "Oh, I'm going to withdraw troops," and like 50 troops are withdrawn, and it's like, okay, Will we still have 2,000 in the rest of the country? And then it seems like we're withdrawing most, if not all of them. So, why is Trump doing this? I don't really know. I actually can't tell you. I actually don't have a good analysis for this. Because my running narrative so far has never been like, Trump is an honest guy and he wants to help us out and he wants to fulfill his campaign promises. I haven't really believed in anything like that for a while. I've kind of cynically denounced that as naive for a while now. And so I guess that would be the default hypothesis, right? In the absence of any other evidence, I don't know what to tell you, except maybe Trump is just trying to be a stand-up guy. Maybe he's honestly like, you know what? Syrian civil war doesn't help Americans either way. Let's pull out. Let's let Turks, hey, Turks, you take care of it. Now, I guess there's an alternative explanation, which is you could say the situation with Turkey is getting bad. The Turks are moving closer and closer in bed with the Russians over this Kurdish issue. And NATO at large, not just America, but NATO at large, the Atlanticists, they are looking at this and they're saying this is bad. By helping the Turks, by helping the Kurds, sorry, I got a little Kurd stuck in my throat. By helping the Kurds, we are driving a wedge between the West and Turkey. And we don't need to do that, okay? These Kurds are not worth it. They're not worth the trouble. They're not worth the trouble. And I think this might be, okay, so we said we didn't have an analysis. Now it took me 5 minutes, but we have an analysis. Here's the analysis. You're looking at the Middle East. You're looking at Assad. And you're like, well, I would love to create chaos in Syria, right? If you're in the West, you're like, I would love to just destroy Syria and watch it totally crumble and everyone die. And the Kurds can help me do that, right? And the Kurds are wonderful little terrorists, they are. And so we can help out the Kurds, and it'll be great. But then Turkey's upset about this. And you say, go play video games or something. Go do something else, Turkey. Don't worry about this. And Turkey just gets more and more angry, and essentially Turkey storms out of the room and goes and starts hanging out with Russia. And you're like, that's no good. Because as much of a problem that Syria is for the Middle East, for Israel specifically, as much of a problem that Syria presents, Syria is a huge problem. I mean, Syria is a really competent country. They have a lot of smart people in Syria. You may not believe that. You might be a closed-minded person, but actually Syria does have a lot of smart people. Syria has a lot of competent people, and frankly, the country of Syria, it's situated quite nicely. There's a lot of strategic advantages to the Syrian territory. So you're looking at Syria and you're like, it's nice, it's good, but it can be a problem in the wrong hands of someone like Assad, who is a big Israel hater, and he's a big Russia lover. So you look at someone like Assad and you say, no good, we got to get him out. But then if you're going to use the Kurds to do that, which the Kurds can't even finish the job, by the way. ISIS theoretically could have finished the job. The Kurds cannot finish the job. The Kurds can't do it. The Kurds are too incompetent to take over the whole country. They could never do it. So you're looking at the Kurds and you're like, look, the Kurds aren't going to finish the job. And all they're doing at this point, if they're not killing Assad, what are they doing? They're annoying Turkey. They're driving Turkey into the arms of Russia. So we got to put a stop to this. We've got to abandon the Kurds and allow Turkey to come in. And here's what we'll do. Instead of having ISIS and the Kurds attack Assad, that plan has fallen apart. All right, well, what we'll do now is we are going to have Turkey fight Assad. And the way we'll do that is we'll say, Turkey, go ahead and invade Syria. Now Assad, or not Assad, but Erdogan will say, oh, that's brilliant. I'm going to invade Syria. I'm going to gain territory. I'm going to put a stop to these Kurds. Now at some point, Assad is going to say, hey, that's Syrian land, give it back. And Erdogan's going to say, make me. And then at some point in the future, you're setting up a conflict between the Syrians and between Turkey. And if you have a conflict between the Syrians and Turkey, then essentially you've once again got Russia against Turkey. And if you got Russia against Turkey, Turkey's going to go back to the NATO side, to the American side. So this might be the calculation. Just there was an experiment. They tried to take out Assad. They tried to use the Kurds. They tried to use ISIS. It didn't work out. Apparently that's because Trump stopped funding ISIS. So I don't know. I don't know why he did that. I don't know if it was people decided it was time to pull the plug. I don't know if Trump was going off the reservation with that. I don't know exactly how that decision was made. But I know at this point, if you're looking at the situation honestly, funding these Kurds is only driving the Turks into the hands of the Russians. So at this point, you cut your losses. You say, look, let's let Turkey invade. Hopefully at some point there's a war. In the same way that we had a war between Iran and Iraq, maybe we can have a war between Turkey and Syria. Maybe that'll be fun. And maybe that'll spice up the Middle East and keep things spicy. Because there can never be a dull moment. We can never just relax and, build two-story buildings and, have civilization. No, that can't be allowed to happen. America will not suffer that. We must continue to inflame warfare. We must be behind the cause of all warfare in the Middle East. So we must constantly induce violence and fund terrorists. So that is where we're at in the Middle East. It's a fun time with the Kurds. It is a fun time.